Hello, this is Dr. Eric Bricker and thank you for watching AHealthcareZ. Today's topic is the benefits of high healthcare costs, and one of those benefits is the ICU. So if today's video were a poem, it would be called Ode to the ICU. Okay? Now, there are many ICU beds in America. What does that mean? There are between 20 and 32 ICU beds per 100,000 people in America. Okay, how does that compare to other countries? In Canada, there are only 14. So there's only half as many ICU beds per person. Okay, in Australia, there's only like half to a third as many ICU beds. There's only 9 for every 100,000 people. And in Japan, there's only 8. So here we have, other, quote unquote, modern industrialized countries, and they don't have even close to the number of ICU beds per person that the United States has. So we got a ton of ICU beds. Now, why is that important? It's because America is able to accommodate increased demand for ICU beds. Now, anybody who's ever been in a hospital knows that you have busy days and not so busy days, and you have busy seasons and not so busy seasons. And certainly that holds true for the ICU. There will be times when the ICU is a ghost town and there's almost nobody there. And then literally within like a couple of days, the ICU could be packed. One of the main causes of that is the flu season, right? So 10% of all flu admissions to the hospital, the patients end up in the ICU. Now, what is one of the amazing things about the ICU is the ventilator. It's ventilatory support and putting people on a breathing machine and where they cannot breathe on their own. And 20 to 40% of patients that are in the ICU require mechanical ventilation. Like, mechanical ventilation has to happen in the ICU. I mean, yes, they do it temporarily in the operating room, but really, you're not really anywhere else on the floor in the hospital on a vent. Like, if you're intubated on a vent, you're in the ICU. It's one of the wonders of modern medicine is the ventilator. And I have seen countless patients who easily would have died, but because of mechanical ventilation, they were able to overcome their pneumonia, their sepsis, what have you. So it's amazing. Now, I want to show you graphically what this excess capacity means. So let's just say that America only had 15 beds per 100,000 people, kind of similar to Canada, but we really have closer to like 20 to 30. And what we have here is a bell-shaped curve in terms of like demand for ICU services, right? And so, as you can imagine, it oftentimes will follow a bell-shaped curve. And whether it's like perfectly bell-shaped or not, that's not the point. The point is that if we only had 15, that means that all the people here in this grayed in, this shaded in area, were we to have the same number of ICU beds per person as Canada, they would not be able to get into the ICU. So all of these people that I show shaded in here, when you have like a huge increase in demand because of the flu season, these people are actually able to get into the ICU. Let me give you a personal story about that. A friend of mine, his wife recently and he were hosting a dinner party, and this is like a month ago. She was doing totally fine. Small dinner party for the neighborhood, right? The next morning, she cannot wake up because she is in septic shock. He didn't know that at the time, but she couldn't wake up. So he called 911. They come to the house. The paramedics take her blood pressure. It is 40/15. I mean, that is the verge of death because she was in septic shock. They put her in the ambulance. They take her to a hospital that had only recently been built within the last 5 years. She immediately gets admitted to the ICU from the ER, and she gets the last ICU bed because the ICU is packed because of the flu season. Almost everybody in the ICU had flu, and she was in there for septic shock. Now, had this been another country, she would not have been able to be admitted to the ICU, and she had to be put on the ventilator. She had to be put on what are called cardiac pressors to get her blood pressure up, and she survived. And today, she's like doing great. She could go back to like hosting a dinner party if she wanted to. Now, arguably, that's because the ICU and the quote-unquote overcapacity of ICU beds saved her life. Let me tell you the opposite story. When I was working at a hospital in Baltimore, again, flu season, wintertime, ICU was full, 0 beds. And there was a patient that came in with pneumonia, what's called ARDS, which is respiratory failure, and he had to be intubated in the ER. He could not be admitted to the ICU for over 12 hours. He came in at 10 in the morning. We couldn't get him up to the ICU that night. I was on call, so I saw the entire thing from the ER down to overnight. And he ended up expiring. Okay, now, can I say that he expired because he couldn't make it up to the ICU sooner? No, of course I can't say that. But I can tell you there is no way that either I in the ICU or the ER doctor wanted things to happen the way that they did. But we ran out of beds. We ran out of beds. Okay, so what is my point here? I'm going to get to points 3 and 4. So what are the reasons that people are in the ICU? 1 is respiratory failure, like I just talked about. 2 is heart attack. 3 is stroke. Either an ischemic stroke, which is a blocked blood vessel, or a hemorrhagic stroke, which is a bleeding, like a popped aneurysm, which is bleeding in the brain. Post-catheterization, so in other words, when they do a heart procedure to put in a stent, oftentimes they'll go to the ICU afterwards. And then sepsis, like that, the wife of that friend that I just described. Now, as one can imagine, many of these patients in the ICU are not on employer health plans. There was one Harvard hospital, I'll leave a link to it in the show notes, they did a study of their ICU admissions. 45% of the ICU admits were over the age of 65. These are people that are on Medicare. Okay, so I'm going to tie this to my other videos with the punchline for today. We talked about how Medicare does not pay enough for the hospital to run itself, to keep all these ICU beds open. So the employers have to, quote unquote, overcharge employer health plans in order to have all these ICU beds to save all these lives. So you, the employers in America, you are doing a fantastic service. You are literally saving half these people in the ICU, because of your generous payments to the hospital. If you wanted to, you could think of this as like charitable payments to the hospital to save all these incredibly sick and elderly people. So, if you are the executive of a hospital and you see that you're not getting paid as much from Medicare and Medicaid as you would like to be paid, and you see peak demand for your ICU, and you've got to keep those beds open or even expand them, and you see employers in America and you see corporate America that is using their profits for stock buybacks, that is having huge amounts of debt, that you as a hospital administrator, and let's say you were an astute hospital administrator, and you're like, look, I realize it's not the insurance company that's quote unquote paying for this, it's actually the employers in America that are paying for this. Then you, as a hospital administrator who's trying to keep those ICU beds open and expand those ICU beds, you might say, look, I want some of that corporate money. If they've got so much money to do stock buybacks, maybe they need to give me some of that money so that I can fund my ICU and carry on my mission. And honestly, that might be a valid argument. And so it's important for us when we're working through these issues in America to have empathy for the other side, to have empathy for their goals, to have empathy for their situation. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention today. Thank you for watching AHealthcareZ.